What would you do if armed men with badges came to your door at midnight, demanding to be let in? Most people would freeze. Some would obey. A few might ask questions. But what if something about them, their tone, their eyes, their posture, screamed that they weren't who they claimed to be? That was the night everything changed for me. That was the night my wife's scream shattered our home, and the Glock 19 on my nightstand became the only line between life and death. It started quiet. Too quiet. Our neighborhood wasn't fancy. Just another HOA-controlled suburb where lawns had to be trimmed to regulation height, where paint colors had to be approved, and where letters showed up in your mailbox if your trash bin stayed out a minute too long. We hated it, but it was affordable, and with my wife 8 months pregnant, stability mattered. She needed rest. She needed peace. And until that night, I thought I could give it to her. The clock read 11:53 p.m. when I first heard it. A knock. Not a polite one. Not the kind of knock you hear from a lost neighbor or a package delivery mix-up. It was sharp, heavy, authority in every thud. Bam, bam, bam. I froze in bed, blinking into the dark. My wife stirred beside me, mumbling something soft, her hand resting on her belly. Then came the voice. HOA security. Open up. HOA security? That didn't make sense. Our HOA didn't have security. They barely managed the landscaping contract. But the tone, commanding, official, sent a chill crawling down my spine. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. Stay here, I whispered to my wife. Don't move. I'll check. She murmured again, half asleep. I didn't want her alarmed. Not yet. Another round of knocking shook the doorframe. Open up. HOA War. I crept to the window beside the door and peeled back the curtain just enough to see. 3 men stood on my porch. Dark uniforms, patches on their shoulders, flashlights in their hands, angled low but steady. And this made my stomach twist. Each of them carried what looked like holstered sidearms. They looked official. Too official. But not quite right. The patches weren't clean. They looked printed, generic. Their belts had gear, but mismatched. One man had a taser. Another had nothing but a flashlight and a bulge that could have been a weapon. And their eyes weren't calm with authority. They were hungry. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called through it. What do you want? The one in front leaned in close, his voice clipped. We've had reports of non-compliance. HOA violatin. Open the door now. Non-compliance? At midnight, my gut screamed wrong. I kept my voice steady. You've got the wrong house. Show me ID. Silence. Then a chuckle. You want ID? How about I show you handcuffs instead? Open the door. That was when my wife's footsteps sounded behind me. She had gotten out of bed. Who is it? She whispered. Before I could answer, one of the men outside slammed his fist against the door. Last warning. Open up. The sound reverberated through the house. My wife gasped, clutching her belly. And that tiny, terrified sound, her voice cracking, her breath catching, must have carried through the door, because the man outside suddenly grinned. I saw it in the sliver of his face lit by the porch light. He grinned. Something inside me went cold. I turned to my wife. Go back to the bedroom. Now, lock the door. But she didn't. She shook her head, wide-eyed, refusing to leave me. She was stubborn like that, too stubborn for her own good. And before I could argue, the men outside made the choice for us. The front door jolted on its hinges. They were trying to force it. I stepped back, heart hammering. My eyes darted to the corner table by the stairs. That's where my Glock 19 usually sat. Not locked in a safe, not hidden away. Ready. Because I believed in being prepared. But I hadn't grabbed it yet. The wood splintered near the latch. My wife gasped again, backing into the hallway. Then, the door flew open. They didn't even bother disguising it as lawful entry. No warrant. No explanation. Just brute force. 3 of them spilling into my home like wolves. The leader raised a flashlight, blinding me. Hands where I can see them. The second man moved toward my wife. The third kicked the door shut behind him. And that was the moment, when his beam of light landed on my wife. her pregnant belly unmistakable beneath her nightshirt, that everything inside me shifted from fear to fury. She tried to move back. He grabbed her arm. "Don't touch her," I barked. He didn't listen. He shoved her into the wall. Hard. Her arm twisted with a sickening crack. Her scream tore through me like glass. I saw her crumple, clutching at the wall for support, her face pale with shock, her other hand desperately shielding her stomach. And that was it. That was the line. I moved. Fast. The men hadn't seen the Glock yet. They hadn't realized what kind of man they had just cornered. But as my hand closed around the grip, all three froze, just for a split second, like the world had inhaled and held its breath. My wife's scream still echoed in the hallway. Her arm hung limp at her side. Her tears caught the light, and the weight of the Glock 19 in my hand suddenly felt like justice. I raised it. My finger found the trigger, and I swore to myself, before they blinked, before they drew another breath, these men would learn what it meant to break into the wrong home. The weight of the Glock was familiar, comforting, not heavy, not light, just right. A tool I had trained with, a tool I trusted, a tool I never thought I'd need in my own home. The men weren't ready for it. They had expected compliance, fear, panic. They hadn't expected a man prepared to fight. The leader's flashlight beam wavered, just a fraction, when he saw the gun. The other two stiffened, their movements slowing. They hadn't drawn theirs yet. They weren't fast enough. I had the drop, but this wasn't just about me. It was about her, my wife. Her scream still echoed in the hallway, her good hand clutching her belly, her face twisted with pain. She leaned against the wall, eyes wide, her broken arm hanging useless. And in that moment, I wasn't just a man with a gun. I was a husband. I was a father. And they had crossed the line. I leveled the Glock at the leader's chest. Step back. Now. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. His jaw tightened, his body frozen. He hadn't expected me to push back. But the one who had grabbed my wife, he smirked, like he thought I was bluffing. He took a step toward her again. "Put it down," he sneered. "Or she's." I didn't let him finish. The crack of the shot was deafening inside the house. A flash of light, the recoil sharp in my palm. The man's smirk vanished in an instant. His body jolted, then crumpled sideways, crashing into the hallway table. My wife screamed again, but this time it wasn't pain. It was shock. The other two men snapped out of their hesitation. One reached for his sidearm. The other lunged forward, hand outstretched. Too slow. I fired again, and again. The second man dropped, clutching his shoulder, collapsing in a heap near the doorway. The third froze mid-step, hand still hovering near his weapon. His eyes went wide. His flashlight clattered to the floor, rolling across the wood and casting wild beams of light across the walls. I turned the Glock on him. "Try it," I growled. He didn't. He lifted his hands, slowly, palms out, trembling. Silence fell, broken only by my wife's ragged breathing and the faint groans of the man on the floor. My finger stayed on the trigger, my eyes locked on the last intruder. One wrong move and he'd join the others. For a long moment, nobody moved. The house seemed to hold its breath. Then my wife whimpered. Her arm, her belly, her tears. That sound snapped me back. I kept the Glock trained on the intruder but shouted over my shoulder. "Call 911. Now." She hesitated, staring at the blood on the floor. "Go," I barked. She scrambled toward the bedroom, clutching her side. The intruder with his hands up licked his lips nervously. You don't know who we are," he stammered. "Oh, I know exactly who you are," I hissed. "Trash. Pretending to be cops. Breaking into my home. Hurting my wife." I stepped closer, the Glock steady. "You picked the wrong house." He shook his head rapidly. We were just following orders." "Whose orders?" I snapped. But before he could answer, headlights cut across the window. A car. Pulling up. My stomach clenched. "Back up?" The intruder's eyes flicked toward the window. His lips curled into something that looked too much like relief. That was enough for me. I shoved him backward with the barrel of the Glock, forcing him to stumble to the ground. "Stay down," I ordered. I darted to the window, peering through the blinds. Another vehicle sat idling in front of my house. Dark, unmarked, engine rumbling low. Two silhouettes inside. They weren't neighbors. They weren't help. They were with them. My heart pounded harder. This wasn't just three punks with fake uniforms. This was bigger, organized, and they weren't done. I turned back toward the intruder still on the floor. But he was gone. He had bolted the second I looked away, scrambling toward the back door. I caught a glimpse of him vanishing into the night as the screen door banged shut. I cursed under my breath. The groaning man on the floor tried to crawl toward the entryway, leaving a dark smear of blood behind him. I kicked his weapon away and kept the Glock aimed at him. Then sirens. In the distance, growing louder. Relief surged through me, but only for a second, because the car outside revved its engine and sped off into the night, leaving nothing but taillights fading into the dark. By the time the red and blue lights flashed across my lawn, two of the intruders were gone. One lay bleeding in my hallway, and my wife. My wife was pale, trembling, clutching her stomach with one hand and her shattered arm with the other. The cops stormed in, weapons raised. For a moment, I thought they might mistake me for the suspect. But then they saw the uniforms on the men, the blood, the broken door. And the truth hit them fast. The paramedics rushed to my wife, lifting her carefully onto a stretcher. Her eyes found mine, wide and desperate. "Don't let them get away," she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. But inside, I already knew. This wasn't over. Whoever those men were, they hadn't come for an HOA violation. They had come for something else. Something bigger. And I was going to find out what. Because no one hurts my family and walks away. The night didn't end when the sirens came. If anything, that was when the real nightmare began. The flashing red and blue lights painted my street in chaos. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Officers shouted orders, their boots pounding across the pavement as paramedics wheeled my wife toward the ambulance. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, her eyes locked on mine even as the doors swung shut between us. I wanted to be with her, more than anything, but I couldn't, not yet, because something was wrong. The uniforms the intruders wore still lay on the floor. Black fabric, crisp patches, shiny badges that at first glance looked authentic. They were clean, too clean, like they had come straight out of a box. No wear, no dirt, no history, and the car that had idled outside, dark, waiting, watching, was gone without a trace. This wasn't random. This wasn't some petty break-in. It was something calculated, something rehearsed, and I knew if I didn't find out who was behind it, they'd be back. The police worked quickly, but I could see it in their faces. Confusion, unease. They weren't sure what they had walked into. "Sir," one of them said, his voice calm but edged, "we need you to set the gun down." I did, slowly, placing the Glock on the floor, my hands raised, palms out. "You think I'm the bad guy here?" I growled. "No, sir," the officer replied, shaking his head. "But we need to follow procedure. We've got shots fired, one suspect dead, another wounded, another fled. You understand?" I did. Didn't like it, but I did. They cuffed me. Standard. Not rough, not violent, just methodical. The way real cops do it. Meanwhile, the wounded intruder moaned on the hallway floor, his blood pooling, his breaths ragged. He was barely conscious. "Keep him alive," I said coldly. "He knows something." The officer gave me a look. Not a promise, not a denial. Just a look. Hours later, at the precinct, they uncuffed me. I gave my statement. Everything. From the knock at the door to the scream of my wife to the moment the last man fled. The detective across the table leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. His nameplate read Delaney. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He didn't waste words. "You're telling me 3 men, dressed like cops, forced their way in claiming to be HOA enforcement?" "Yes." "They injured your wife?" "Yes." "You fired in self-defense?" "Yes." He tapped a pen against the table. And then a 4th vehicle pulled up outside. Unmarked. 2 silhouettes inside. Yes. And they left as soon as they heard sirens. Yes. Delaney exhaled slowly. You know what this looks like? I leaned forward. Tell me. It looks like you were targeted. No kidding. But the question is why, he added. That was the same question eating me alive. They let me go eventually. Said I'd likely face no charges. Self-defense was clear. The evidence overwhelming. But that didn't feel like victory. Because my wife was in a hospital bed. My unborn child had been threatened. And 2 of the men who did it were still out there. The hospital smelled of bleach and despair. Machines beeped softly as nurses hovered near her bed. Her arm was bandaged, set in place. She winced when she moved, but her eyes were fierce. I'm okay, she whispered as I sat down beside her. The baby's okay too. They checked. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was fleeting. Who were they? She asked. I didn't answer, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know. That night, as she slept, I stared out the window of the hospital room. The city lights flickered in the distance. My mind replayed the events over and over. The uniforms, the timing, the car outside. It wasn't random. It wasn't a robbery. They had come for something. But what? The next morning I went back to the precinct. Straight to Detective Delaney. He looked tired. A styrofoam cup of coffee in hand, dark circles under his eyes. You should be with your wife, he muttered. I should, I said firmly. But I need to know. What did you find on the uniforms? On the wounded guy? He hesitated. Too long. Tell me, I pressed. Finally, he sighed. The uniforms weren't cheap Halloween costumes. They were custom-made. Badges, patches, even serial numbers. Whoever fabricated them had access to the real thing. That chilled me. And the wounded one? Delaney shook his head. Not talking. Lawyered up before he was even conscious. We barely got a name. That was worse. Much worse. It meant he had protection. It meant there was someone behind this. Someone powerful. That night, as I drove back home alone, a thought gnawed at me. The HOA. We'd had arguments before. About fences, paint colors, noise complaints, petty things. But this was different. Unless the HOA was just a mask. Unless it was a cover for something else. I pulled into my driveway. The house was dark. Quiet. Too quiet. Inside, the wreckage was still there. The splintered doorframe. The overturned table. The dark stains on the floor. My home had become a crime scene. But it was also the start of a trail. And I was going to follow it. Because this wasn't about HOA rules. This wasn't about neighbors or noise complaints. This was about power. Control. And whoever they were, they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had come after my family. And I wasn't going to stop until I found them. The house no longer felt like mine. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corners, felt foreign. Violated. But I forced myself to sit there, in the wreckage, with nothing but silence and the steady hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Because sometimes answers hide in the ashes. I replayed the intruder's words in my head. HOA compliance. Enforcement violation. Your property doesn't meet the standards. They hadn't said what violation. They hadn't carried paperwork. They hadn't even bothered with a clipboard. Just aggression. Intimidation. It wasn't about the HOA. It never had been. They had used that as a mask. Because what other excuse would strangers have for banging on a door in broad daylight? A familiar excuse. One that lowers suspicion. But that didn't explain the car outside. Or the fact that the wounded intruder had a lawyer on speed dial before he even hit the ER. That meant money. That meant backing. That meant someone wanted this done quietly and had prepared for fallout. The next morning I started digging. The HOA wasn't new. It had been in the neighborhood for years before I even bought the house. But in the past year there had been changes. New board members. New rules. New fees. At first it looked like the usual suburban nonsense. Power-hungry retirees who needed something to control. But the deeper I went, the stranger it looked. The board president, A man named Harold Finch wasn't from the neighborhood originally. He had moved in less than 18 months ago. No one seemed to know what he did for a living. His house was immaculate, too immaculate, like no one actually lived in it. Another board member, Marlene Vega, had filed for bankruptcy 2 years ago. Yet somehow she now drove a Lexus SUV and wore jewelry that cost more than my mortgage payments. And the HOA's financials? Locked, sealed tighter than a bank vault. Which was odd because by law, members should have access to the books. But every request was denied. Something was being hidden. Something big. I wasn't the only one suspicious. When I started asking quiet questions at the coffee shop, at the gas station, people leaned in, whispered, lowered their voices. One neighbor, old Mr. Grant, shook his head when I mentioned the board. "Don't stir that pot, son," he warned. His eyes darted to the street, as if even the trees might be listening. Men in suits came to my door last year after I complained. Told me to keep quiet. Told me accidents happen. Another neighbor, a young mom, confessed she had been fined thousands for landscape violations she never saw in writing. When she fought back, her car was vandalized. No proof, no witnesses, just a message. This wasn't about keeping lawns trimmed or mailboxes painted. This was about control, fear, money, and my wife had been caught in the crossfire. I went back to Delaney. He didn't look surprised when I laid out what I had found, but he didn't look eager either. "Look," he said, rubbing his temples. "Off the record, I've heard whispers. That HOA of yours isn't just an HOA. It's a shell. A front. For what?" I demanded. "For laundering. For smuggling. For whatever the hell they want. Think about it. Steady cash flow from dues, limited oversight, power to harass anyone who asks questions. It's the perfect disguise." I felt the room tilt around me. "And those men," Delaney continued, "they weren't freelancers. They were hired muscle. Fake uniforms, real weapons, real training. Someone on that board gave the order." That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the hospital room with my wife, watching her breathe, watching her chest rise and fall with our unborn child safe inside. Every second that passed was another second those people were out there. I wanted to storm into Finch's perfect little house and drag him out by his collar. I wanted to make Vega choke on her stolen pearls. But I couldn't. Not yet. Because Delaney was right. This wasn't some ragtag group. This was organized, funded, protected. If I went in guns blazing, I wouldn't come back out. So I needed to be patient, careful, smart. A week later, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address. No stamp. Just dropped in. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it, typed in bold, "You don't want to know who you're messing with. Leave it alone." At the bottom was a symbol. Not an HOA logo. Not anything official. A circle. Inside it, a triangle. Inside that, a single black star. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew one thing. They were watching me. That night, as I sat in my darkened living room with the Glock resting on the table, headlights flashed across my window. A car slowed in front of my house. Stopped. Then, after a long moment, it rolled away. A warning. A test. Or both. My pulse thundered in my ears. The trap was tightening. And if I didn't find a way out soon, it wasn't going to be me caught inside it. It was going to be my wife. My child. The longer you wait, the heavier silence becomes. Silence doesn't just sit in a room. It presses. It smothers. It eats. And I was done being eaten alive. That envelope in my mailbox hadn't been a warning. It had been a challenge. Adare. They wanted me quiet. Instead, I would make them scream. I spent 2 nights watching the neighborhood from my truck. Engine off, binoculars in hand, thermos of bitter coffee that tasted like gasoline. The HOA board had its rhythm. Finch, the so-called president, left his immaculate home at 9 sharp each morning, returned around 5. He never carried groceries, never had visitors. His lights never flickered past midnight. Too clean, too controlled. Vega? She was more social, wine on her porch, yoga in the mornings. But the Lexus trips were strange. Every other evening she drove out with the SUV empty, returned hours later, back bumper low, suspension straining like she was hauling bricks of gold. Or something worse. I snapped photos, license plates, times, patterns. It was enough. Enough to prove this was bigger than HOA dues. But proving it wasn't enough anymore. Not for me. Not after what they had done to my wife. On the third night I made my move. The Glock sat heavy at my side. Not comfort. Not fear. Just inevitability. I approached Finch's house first. The place looked sterile, like it had been staged for a real estate catalog and frozen in time. No kids' toys. No signs of life. Just perfect hedges and dead eyes. I tested the back door. Locked, of course. But locks don't mean much when rage is your crowbar. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Not like a home. Like dust and plastic. Like an office pretending to be a living room. And then I saw it. A safe. Bolted into the floor of the study. Big. Industrial. My pulse spiked. This wasn't HOA records. This was the hive. I didn't have the tools to open it. Not yet. But I had something else. A phone. Camera flash. Click, click, click. Evidence. As I turned, a sound froze me in place. A footstep. Then another. Finch stood in the doorway. His suit perfect. His smile thin. His hand resting casually on the butt of a pistol holstered at his hip. I was wondering how long it would take you, he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. The voice of a man used to threats, used to winning. You broke into my house. I shot back. He smirked. No. You broke into my operation. The room shrank. My thumb brushed the Glock's safety. What are you moving through Vega's SUV? I asked. His smirk didn't falter. You don't want to know. Oh, Ido. For the first time, the smile slipped. He tilted his head, studying me. You've got guts, he said. But guts don't last long in this neighborhood. You've got a wife, a baby on the way. Don't make me orphan your child before it's even born. The air turned to fire inside me. I raised the Glock. You already tried. The silence between us cracked like glass. And then everything exploded. The fight wasn't cinematic. It wasn't slow motion. It was chaos. He drew. I fired first. The shot ripped through his shoulder, spinning him sideways into the wall. He cursed, pulling the trigger anyway, the round punching a hole in the drywall inches from my head. I lunged, tackled him. The pistol clattered across the hardwood. His fist caught my jaw. Pain bloomed. I slammed his head against the floor, again, until the fight bled out of him. When it was done, Finch lay gasping, blood pooling under his suit. You're finished, I said, panting. But his smile returned, crimson teeth flashing. You think I'm the head? He whispered. I'm just the doorman. And then his eyes rolled back. It should have ended there. But it didn't. Because the moment I staggered out of Finch's house, headlights flared. Vega's Lexus screeched into the driveway. She stepped out. Not in yoga gear this time. Combat boots. Black jacket. And not alone. 2 more men spilled from the car carrying rifles. So that was the real muscle. They had been waiting for me. The world slowed. I dove behind a hedge as gunfire shredded Finch's pristine siding. With splinters rained like hail. I fired back, the Glock barking lightning into the night. 1 man dropped, clutching his thigh. The other advanced, methodical, firing controlled bursts. Trained. I had 1 magazine left. They had enough to bury me. But desperation sharpens. I rolled, sprinted low across the lawn, bullets snapping past. I reached the SUV, yanked the rear door open. The stench hit me, chemical, sharp, acrid. The cargo area was packed with seal drums. Not bricks, not cash, chemicals. Enough to cook meth for an army. So that was their game. The HOA wasn't just laundering, it was manufacturing. Distribution hub hidden in plain sight. I didn't have time to process. Vega rounded the corner, pistol leveled. Her shot cracked. The round tore into my shoulder. Pain like fire. I dropped to 1 knee. The Glock shook in my grip. But I aimed anyway, and I emptied the rest of the magazine. Her body jerked, staggered, crumpled. Silence followed. A silence deeper than before. When the sirens finally came, delayed, always delayed. I was sitting on the curb, blood soaking my shirt, the Glock empty at my side. Delaney was the first out of the cruiser. He looked at me, looked at the bodies, looked at the SUV loaded with poison. And for once, he didn't scold. He didn't sigh. He just said, quietly, "You were right. My wife survived. So did our child." Her arm healed slowly, but it healed. The HOA dissolved overnight, its leaders either dead or in custody. The neighborhood breathed for the first time in years. But me, I learned something. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a tie. Sometimes it hands you a fine for the length of your grass. And sometimes it knocks on your door in broad daylight, pretending to be a cop. But when it comes, you don't hide. You don't bow. You fight. Because family is the only law worth obeying. It started small, like rot in the walls. The kind you don't notice until your house collapses around you. I thought moving into a quiet neighborhood with clean sidewalks and smiling neighbors would mean safety, peace, a place to raise my family without the ghosts of the city clawing at our windows. But peace was the first lie. The HOA made sure of that. First, it was letters. Slips of paper tucked under the door. Notices about paint color, lawn length, trash bins left out a little too long. Friendly reminders, they called them. But friendliness doesn't come typed in all caps. It escalated. My wife swore she heard footsteps outside at night. I told her it was nothing. She pressed against me in the dark, whispering that she'd seen a shadow linger by the mailbox too long. I laughed it off. Until the night I found our cat hanging from the fence. No note.
No explanation.
Just a warning written in blood that wasn't supposed to be there. I called the police. And that's when I learned the second lie. The cops weren't coming. I remember the knock. 3 taps, precise, deliberate. When I opened the door, the man on the porch wasn't in uniform. No badge, no cruiser at the curb. Just a black suit, a tight smile, and eyes that looked through me instead of at me. "You've been asking too many questions," he said. I started to answer, but his hand slipped inside his jacket, brushing the butt of a pistol. The message was clear. Shut up or get buried. When he left, my wife's face was pale as chalk. She clutched her stomach, whispering that she didn't feel safe anymore. And in that moment, I realized something. The HOA wasn't just an organization. It was a syndicate, and our neighborhood wasn't just a suburb. It was a prison with white fences for bars. That night, I loaded the Glock I hadn't touched in years. Because if no one else was going to protect us, I would. They came again. Not the suited man this time, but 2 others. Late evening. Black sedan. They didn't bother with knocking. Just stood at the end of my driveway, waiting. My wife pulled back the curtains, trembling. I told her to stay quiet. I stepped outside, the weight of the Glock heavy at my hip. "Can I help you?" I asked. The taller one smiled. "Homeowners Association. You've got some unpaid dues." "Duas?" My voice cracked with something halfway between anger and laughter. "You killed my cat." The smile didn't falter. "Rules are rules." That was when the shorter one opened the trunk. Inside was a baseball bat, a shovel, rope. Not for debt collection, for disposal. I froze. Not out of fear, out of calculation. I knew if I reached for my gun, they'd reach for theirs. The air between us was a string pulled tight, ready to snap. And then salvation or something close. Headlights swept across the street. Cruiser. The 2 men stiffened, exchanged a glance, then slid back into their sedan. The cruiser rolled up slow. The window lowered. Officer Delaney. A tired man, the kind who'd seen too much and cared too little. "You causing trouble again?" he asked me. I pointed at the sedan pulling away. "They were threatening me." Delaney sighed. "You really should learn to keep your head down. This neighborhood, it's not like the others." And just like that, he drove off. Didn't follow them. Didn't ask questions. Just left. The sedan disappeared into the night. And I knew then that I wasn't just dealing with neighbors. I was dealing with something stitched into the police, the town, maybe deeper. And if I didn't act soon, my family would be next. The morning after the driveway standoff, the street felt wrong. Too quiet, even for a suburb that lived on silence. I took the trash out, Glock tucked under my shirt. My wife watched me from the kitchen window, one hand resting on her belly like she could shield the life inside with just her touch. First, it looked normal. Cars parked in driveways, sprinklers hissing, kids' bikes abandoned on the lawn. But then I noticed it, the same black sedan from last night, parked 3 houses down. Engine off. Tinted windows. They weren't even pretending anymore. I dropped the trash can and walked back inside, locking the door behind me. My wife's eyes were wide. They're still out there, aren't they? I nodded. Stay away from the windows. That day crawled by, each hour dragging its nails across my nerves. I checked the blinds every 5 minutes, and the sedan never moved. Not forward, not back. Just there, like a shark waiting for the blood to hit the water. By nightfall, I couldn't take it. I loaded the Glock, racked the slide, and slipped out the back door. The air was cold, sharp in my lungs. I moved through shadows, hugging fences until I was behind the car. That's when I saw the driver's window slide down. The glow of a cigarette lit up the face of the shorter thug from last night. His smirk was there, lazy, confident. Like he knew exactly what I was doing and didn't care. And then I saw it. On the passenger side, another man. Only this one wasn't a face I recognized. He was younger, leaner, wearing a hoodie pulled low. But what made my blood run cold was what he had resting across his lap.
Anar 15.
They weren't just watching anymore. They were preparing. I pulled back into the shadows, forcing myself to breathe slow, to think. Shooting them right there would have been suicide. The rifle against my pistol, no contest. So I waited. An hour. 2. 3. My legs ached, but I didn't move. The cigarette glow burned down to ash. The younger man yawned, stretched, and leaned the rifle against the console. And then, they drove away. Just like that. No words, no moves. Like they wanted me to know they could sit there all night and it meant nothing to them. I returned inside, exhausted but wired. My wife met me at the door. What did they want? She whispered. I kissed her forehead, trying to sound steadier than I felt. Nothing tonight, but it's coming. And I was right, because the very next day they didn't wait outside. They came inside. The knock wasn't a knock. It was a kick. The front door slammed open, splinters raining down. My wife screamed. 3 of them stormed in, faces covered with ski masks this time. No black suits, no pretense. Just violence. Stay back, I shouted, raising the Glock. But one of them grabbed my wife by the arm, yanking her so hard she stumbled. Her cry ripped through me like shrapnel. I fired. The first bullet caught the masked man in the shoulder. He howled, stumbling back, but didn't let go. Instead, he twisted her arm behind her back, wrenching until she screamed again. That's when I heard the sickening pop. Her arm broken. Rage drowned everything. My vision tunneled. I didn't think, didn't breathe. I just squeezed the trigger again and again. The second man dropped, chest torn open. The third dove for cover, but too late. My last round caught him in the leg, spinning him to the floor. Smoke filled the living room. My wife collapsed against the wall, clutching her arm, sobbing. The one I'd hit in the shoulder staggered to his feet, blood dripping between his fingers. He looked at me, then at her, and he laughed. You think this ends here? We own this street. We own the cops. You're dead. Both of you. He stumbled out the door, leaving a trail of blood across the porch. I dropped the empty Glock, heart hammering, ears ringing. My wife whimpered, pale as death, and I realized 2 things at once. 1, this wasn't random intimidation anymore. 2, war had started, and there was no going back. The living room looked like a war zone. Broken door, shattered picture frames, blood sprayed across the hardwood. My wife was slumped against the wall, cradling her broken arm, tears streaking her face. I'd never felt so helpless and so furious. I pressed a towel against her arm, trying to keep her calm until help arrived. But help? Who was left to trust? The cops? The same cops who hadn't lifted a finger when these so-called HOA enforcers showed up at my door? No, I couldn't call them. Every instinct screamed at me to get her to the hospital, but every instinct also screamed that walking out the front door meant walking into an ambush. So I did the only thing I could. I went out the back. I carried her through the shadows of our yard, across fences, through neighbors' lawns until I reached the car parked 2 blocks away. Only then did I dare start the engine and head for the ER. By the time we arrived, she was barely conscious. Nurses rushed her inside, asking questions I couldn't answer. Broken arm, bruised ribs, shock setting in. They wanted to know what had happened. Home invasion, I said. That was all they needed. But while they tended to her, I sat in the waiting room, fists clenched, mind racing. This wasn't just a home invasion. This was a message. They wanted me broken. They wanted her broken. They wanted us gone. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through every security cam I'd set up around the house. The feeds were shaky, grainy, but they told me one thing loud and clear. Those masked men hadn't come on impulse. They'd moved with precision. Formation. Training. These weren't just neighborhood bullies. These were soldiers. And soldiers meant someone higher up was giving the orders. The HOA. But who in the HOA had the power to unleash thugs with rifles, to bribe cops into silence, to run a suburban street like a cartel? I didn't have the answers yet, but I was going to get them. When the doctor finally told me she was stable, I kissed her forehead and whispered a promise. This isn't over. And then I left. Not home. Not yet. Instead, I drove across town to a man I hadn't spoken to in years. A man who owed me favors. A man who still kept his safe stacked with hardware the ATF didn't know about. When he opened the door and saw me standing there, blood on my shirt and murder in my eyes, he didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Basement, he said. And in the basement I found what I needed. A shotgun. A second pistol. Boxes of ammo. Tactical gear from his army days. Even a few grenades that looked too old to trust but too tempting to ignore. I strapped up, loaded magazines until my hands ached, and finally holstered the Glock again. This wasn't about defending anymore. This was about hunting. Back at the house, the place was empty. Blood still smeared across the floorboards. The smell of gunpowder lingering. I stood in the center of the chaos and listened. The silence mocked me, and then I heard it, a buzz. My phone lit up. Unknown number. I answered. The voice on the other end was calm, smooth, mocking. The voice on the other end was calm, smooth, mocking. You think you're tough because you pulled the trigger? You think 1 or 2 bodies matter. You have no idea who you're up against. You broke the rules, neighbor. And when you break our rules, you don't get warnings. You get buried. I didn't speak. I just let him talk. Enjoy your wife while you can. Next time, it won't just be her arm. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, every muscle in my body trembling with rage. They weren't just threatening us anymore, they were promising. That night I didn't sleep. I cleaned my weapons, laid them out in a row on the kitchen table, and studied every inch of my neighborhood through the cams. And at 3 a.m. I saw it. The sedan again, back at the curb. Lights off. This time I didn't hide. This time I didn't wait. I chambered around, walked out the front door, and aimed straight at the windshield. The passenger door opened. A figure stepped out, hands raised. But it wasn't one of the thugs. It was a woman, tall, blonde, dressed in a sharp suit. She smiled at me like I was the one trespassing. "Put the gun down," she said calmly. "We need to talk." And just like that, the rules of the war shifted again. The woman in the suit didn't flinch, even with my Glock leveled at her chest. She stepped closer, heels clicking against the pavement, calm as a preacher at Sunday Mass. "Shoot me if you want," she said, voice cold. "But it won't stop what's coming." I didn't lower the gun. Not an inch. "Who are you?" I asked. Her smile widened. "Name doesn't matter. What matters is the organization I represent. Homeowners Association to the naive. But to those who matter, we are the order." I kept my aim steady, But my mind raced. Order. Trained enforcers. Bought cops. It all lined up. What do you want with me? With my wife? I demanded. You broke compliance, she said simply. Your house, your payments, your refusal to follow protocol. You've been marked since day one. We sent warnings. You ignored them, so we escalated. I clenched my teeth. You crushed my wife's arm. She tilted her head. Collateral damage. My finger tightened on the trigger. Just one squeeze and she'd drop. But something in her eyes warned me. She wasn't afraid to die, because she wasn't alone. Movement flickered in the dark. I turned my head slightly. Across the street, shadows shifted. Men in black masks, rifles in hand, surrounding me like wolves circling prey. The order had come prepared. The woman whispered, almost sweetly, "Surrender, or your wife's next visit to the hospital will be her last." That was the moment something inside me snapped. I didn't hear her words anymore. I didn't see her smile. I saw my wife's face twisted in pain, clutching her arm, whispering through tears, "Don't let them win." I pulled the trigger. The shot cracked the night open. The woman's body jerked back, collapsing onto the hood of her sedan. Chaos erupted instantly. Masked men opened fire. Bullets ripped through siding. Glass exploded. Alarms screamed. But I was already moving. I dove behind the SUV in the driveway, returned fire with the Glock, then rolled to the shotgun I'd stashed on the porch. The blast lit up the night, dropping 2 men instantly. Screams. Gunfire. The war had come to my street. They thought they had me cornered. They were wrong. I'd spent weeks studying their patterns on the cameras. I knew where they parked, where they hid, where they thought they were safe. Rendepin. Toss. The blast tore through the hedges, sending one of them flying like a rag doll. I sprinted low, reloaded, and emptied the shotgun into the SUV where 2 more ducked for cover. The windshield spiderwebbed, then caved in with their bodies. But still they came. Still more shadows swarmed from the darkness, disciplined, precise. They weren't just here to kill me. They were here to erase me. And that's when the cavalry arrived. Not cops. Not neighbors. My wife. She stumbled out from the corner of the house, arm in a sling, pale from blood loss, but holding the pistol I'd left on the nightstand. She fired. The round caught a thug square in the neck, dropping him before he could flank me. I shouted at her to go back inside, but she just gritted her teeth. "They don't get to take our home," she hissed. Pride and fear twisted inside me, but I didn't have time to argue. We fought together back to back, 2 against an army. Every shot was fire, every scream a warning, every heartbeat a countdown to the end. And then the silence came. The last body hit the ground. Smoke lingered. Sirens wailed in the distance. The street looked like a battlefield. The woman in the suit was gone, vanished, bleeding trail leading into the night. But her army was broken. The order was exposed. By the time the real police arrived, the story was already written in blood. They tried to spin it. Gang attack, they called it. Random violence. But the neighbors knew. They'd seen the SUVs, the rifles, the masks. The lie couldn't hold. Reporters swarmed the next morning. Cameras flashed. Words like corruption, cover-up, secret HOA cabal blared across the news. The order wasn't untouchable anymore. And as my wife squeezed my hand, pain in her eyes but fire in her voice, I knew one thing. They'd chosen the wrong house. Weeks later, the neighborhood was quiet again. Too quiet. Most of the HOA board had resigned. Some skipped town. Some disappeared. But sometimes late at night I still see the sedan, parked at the corner. Lights off. I know she's still out there. The woman in the suit. Watching. And I'm ready. Always ready. Because when they crushed my wife's arm, they didn't just break her bones. They broke the chains holding me back. And I will never let them touch us again.